Steve Stevens, how you doing today?
I'm great, neighbor.
I know. Yeah, we just talked about that. We're both in Henderson, Nevada these days.
Right on. Yeah.
So you're Grammy Award winning, which is you won the Grammy for the Top Gun theme, which is one of the best movie themes ever, in my opinion. Obviously, you're very well known for your partnership with Billy Idol over 30 years. You've done a lot of other stuff too, playing in several other bands and playing on several other people's records. So yeah, an amazing career. Tell me how you got started, because you're a Brooklyn born originally, right?
Um, Born in Brooklyn and lived in Brownsville, which is where Mike Tyson and Riddick Bowe from,
Oh wow, okay,
and a little tough neighborhood. But
exactly.
and then my parents moved to Rockaway Beach, and that's primarily where I grew up. And there was a very famous protest singer named Phil Oakes from Rockaway, and his sister was my very first guitar teacher. And I just picked up the guitar. Actually, I have an older brother, 5 years older than me, and all of his friends played guitar. This is like the height of the folk uh, uh, music boom, James Taylor, Joni
Right.
Mitchell. And I just wanted to hang out with my brother and his friends. So, um, I started playing guitar and, guitar was everywhere. This is, then the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, and we all of the world was off and running with electric guitars.
Yeah, it's funny the Beatles thing too, because nowadays we have like a gazillion TV channels, streaming channels, but back then half the country is watching the Beatles.
It was crazy also because my aunt who lived down the street worked at JFK Airport, and the Beatles were on the evening news, and it was quite a phenomenon between them arriving, and living in New York. It was, Ed Sullivan and all of it. It was just you couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that was kind of like early mid 60s is such a rich time for music, especially in New York, because you have the Brill
Yes.
Building guys. You got a
Yep.
lot of obviously the Motown stuff's happening too. So, I mean, I kind of, in a way, I wish I had a time machine where I could go back and, and hang out with all those amazing artists that we all kind of grew up
And
loved, right?
yeah, you had the rock and roll thing, and you had the Greenwich Village thing, uh, and then Saturday morning cartoons. Every cartoon character played guitar, and guitar was the instrument. I mean, it was and for a kid like me, it was a great way to get attention.
Yeah, yeah. Who were some of your big guitar influences? I mean, obviously we had the Beatles, but then you were also listening. Who else were you kind of taking inspiration from?
So, so I started on playing folk and classical guitar, and I started really young, 7 and a half. I'd say seriously by about 8 and a half. And then I didn't get an electric guitar till I was 13. So all that at the time was spent playing a lot of folk stuff, as I mentioned. And then I went to a music camp, and there was a flamenco guitarist. I didn't know what it was at the time, but was the first teacher that was so passionate, and it was really fiery, and
Yeah,
I
it's
saw
pretty
my
it's
first.
pretty rock and roll, really, in its own
It
way, right?
is like the metal of acoustic guitar. And then you combine it with, my parents brought me to see the Jose Greco Dance Company, and the women were beautiful and dancing, and it was, I just fell in love with the whole flamenco thing. And but then so when I got my electric guitar was just when the English progressive rock thing was happening, and it was the first time I heard guitarists who could apply all of the other styles that I had in my back pocket, like classical and a bit of jazz and
Right.
flamenco. And these guys were intertwining it with in the context of a rock band, King Crimson and Genesis, and yes, and so that was really and fortunately we had a great radio station in New York, WNEW FM, and
Hmm.
every Friday they had a show called Things from England, and I would go out and get the imports. And
Yeah, so you
so
got like Eric Clapton and Beck and all these like, yeah,
oh yeah, I mean, it was all of those records that were coming out of England at that time. I was a real I didn't know it at the time, but I was a real Anglophile, and
Yeah.
I like the American folk stuff. I didn't like American rock bands that much, with the exception of Aerosmith, who were very
Right.
much sounded like the Yardbirds anyway, really. So,
Yeah. I think
but I
a lot of
loved
those
all.
bands they were influenced by a lot of the same guys, right?
Yep, yep. So I loved all that. I devoured all that English stuff. Yeah.
Hmm. How did you, I mean, you're kind of most synonymous, of course, with working with Billy for so long. And I first saw you on MTV, like many people did. That was my first introduction to you and to Billy way back in the 80s. And I was like, wow, this is really, it was punk, but it was rock. It was like a couple different
Mm-hmm.
things going on, great playing, great production. Obviously, great music videos, which you were heavily featured in. But how did that come about? How did you meet Billy? How did that connection happen?
So the previous band I was in was produced by Jimmy Miller, the world-renowned producer of the Rolling Stones. And we had a deal with Island Records. We went down to Compass Point in the Bahamas to record, and we didn't know what we were doing, and it completely fell apart, the whole deal. But when we returned to New York, we were picked up by we had to get out of this deal and start showcasing to other labels, and we were picked up by Coin Management, Bill Coin, who managed
Right.
Kiss.
Yep.
And I had a real, come to Jesus heart to heart with him, and said, I don't think this is the situation for me. This is not what I'm meant to be doing. I need to meet, I need to work with, seasoned musicians, experienced musicians, because, I didn't know much about the recording or anything like that. And
Yeah.
so I left
How old were you at that point?
I think I was 19. Yeah,
Yeah. So you're
19 or
like,
20.
yeah,
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 yeah.
you're like a young guy trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
uh,
I was heartbroken that the deal fell apart and the record
sure.
was shelved, and then so a Coin Management agreed to manage me and find me the right situation, and within a month or so, I got a call, and Bill said, "Hey, do you know who Billy Idol is?" And by then, I was hanging out in the clubs, and I'd hear the remix, the dance remix of Dancing with Myself every night,
Right. Yeah.
multiple times a night, and said, "Yeah, Dancing with Myself." I knew some of the knew Ready Steady Go from Generation X. And he said, "Well, Bill said, we're managing him. He's moved to New York, and you guys should meet and see if there's something there." And that's what and I was crafty, though, because what I said to Billy Idol was that I knew every musician in New York, and even if you don't pick me as a guitar player, I'll help you audition bass and
That's
drums. And
so smart. Yeah.
so as
Yeah.
I'm auditioning, uh, I'm kind of seeing what he's into, and
Right.
as we're hanging out, I'm realizing there's a lot of common ground, especially being I was a New York kid, so knew all the Velvet Underground, loved Lou Reed and the Dolls, and by then, the bands that were coming out of CBGB's, Talking
Right.
Heads,
Yeah.
Television, Tom Verlaine. Because I never looked at guitar styles as being part of a movement, as it was in England. The punk rock thing was really against all the Guitar Hero stuff, the
Yeah. It was kind of
excessive.
the anti guitar hero, right?
Yeah, it was, they had enough with the Rolls Royces and the mansions, and
You
and
play.
uh, I just looked at it as guitar play, but I love that Pistols record, that first
Yeah. The energy
Sex
is awesome.
Pistols.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and the guitar sound, and it was like, it was like hearing the first Led Zeppelin record. It was so different. And so little by little, we found common ground, and we started hanging out and writing. And I don't think I was ever hired, and I've not been fired yet. So
It just kind of morphed into a.
it did. It did.
Sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes that just was really meant to be. Like, not. I've actually I played with Cirque du Soleil for years, bass player too, and it was the same thing. I never I came in as a sub, but I never technically got hired in the way that they normally do it. Sometimes that's the best way, right?
Yeah, it is. And it was a natural progression as far as writing and stuff. Uh, we were very fortunate. We had Keith Forsey as our producer, who was um, uh, came Keith actually came from doing disco stuff with Giorgio Moroder, and
Wow. Yeah.
did Donna Summer's records. So the three of us covered a lot of ground. Billy's love of a lot of great American rock and roll stuff, which was Creedence and the Doors, and I don't think he loved reggae, and I don't think he ever, when we'd sit down and listen to records, I don't think he played punk rock records to me. I remember him turning me on to Susie and the Banshees, because
that's cool stuff, right?
that was a guitar player, John McGee, that had worked with Billy on the third Gen X record, and he was really inventive, and to me was like the progression of progressive rock guitar, all those textures, and also the Cure, and there's a lot of cool guitar things happening as well.
Yeah, well, that was a really
yeah.
exciting time, like that kind of early '80s, late '70s.
Yes.
There's a lot of really cool bands happening, and I mean,
Absolutely.
you guys are one of the bands. You guys are very influential. I remember back in the day, you had to play Billy Idol tunes if you're playing clubs, because you guys were all over the radio, all over MTV. So tell me about actually the MTV experience, because you're a musician, you're obviously you're recording, but then MTV kicks in,
Right.
and like that's a whole nother level of kind of fame, right?
I mean, I really my involvement in the videos was very minimal. That was all Billy Idol. I mean, him seeking out Tobe Hooper to do the White Wedding video. Tobe Hooper was the director of uh, what's the horror film, the classic? I don't know. It escapes me now.
One of the classics.
Yeah. Night of Living Dead, or
Oh, okay. Awesome.
no, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay. Cool.
How Billy had the vision to get that guy to
Right.
but it worked. It worked, and he
Totally. Yeah.
knew between him and his girlfriend Perry Lister, she was a dancer, so all of those people that are in those videos were all their group of friends, dancers and the directors, and a lot of those directors came out of London at the time, Julian Temple, and so it was all these kind of artistic people. Where my involvement, I think, came into the fore was when we did the Rebel Yell video, because we said we need to do live performance video. We're getting ready to go out on tour. And what it did was, we were going to slog it out in all these little towns and get in the van and play it. But by the MTV audience seeing how a Billy Idol audience reacted, and they all wore the gear and the studded bracelets and the spiked up hair,
Right.
They all started showing up like that. It was almost like being in a gang, and it was a great way to kind of like telegraph to the audience that we were going to be touring.
Yeah.
So I love to, anytime it came time to do a video, I was the first one to say, hey, let's do the live video,
Where are you recording, in New York or London?
I think we froze for a couple of seconds, so I
sorry.
didn't hear that.
That's okay. When you got like those early records, you primarily in New York? Where did you do?
So the first record was done in Los Angeles, because our producer Keith Forsey was there. And Rebel Yell was done in New York, which was not only in New York, but it was done at Electric Lady Studios, which was
awesome. Yeah.
place that Hendrix built. And there was a all-night movie theater next door that I used to go to as a teenager to see rock films, like Song Remains the Same, and
Right.
The Kids Are All Right. And I'd say to my friends, one day I'll be in that studio next door, and to be in there. I don't think I left. I'd sleep in that place, because it was like
the vibe. Yeah.
And it was a laboratory, and I really soaked up all that knowledge of how to record and what was, possibilities, because I was adamant that on Rebel Yell, I was going to try and do everything on guitar and limit the amount of keyboards on it.
Yeah. Do you find yourself, like, especially those early days, did you find yourself kind of pinching yourself when you're in places like that studio, or you're doing these huge stadium tours, when that stuff actually happens, even though it's your dream when you're a kid? what's your reaction to that? Is it like, wow, or how do you
It's
process it?
such, well, being in that studio with great engineers and great players, and uh, was just an incredible opportunity. All of the good stuff aligned for us, the right songs, um, right studio, everything was there. We had to be real knuckleheads to screw that up. Um, I would say in regards to playing bigger venues, that was really a kind of progression that we were almost unaware of. We started playing clubs and then got to bigger clubs and theaters. And I remember when we got to LA and we played Santa Monica Civic, and I said, "Hey, I think we're doing all right here."
Yeah, it's an iconic place. Yeah,
And then we that tour ended up, we got a nice tour bus, and then
right,
I think the last date on that was Nassau Coliseum, which is where I used to go see is an arena. I used to go see bands play, and
right.
um, but it wasn't like an overnight thing. It was really gradual, and I think that was saving grace for us
I
because
was
we
going to
got
say
our
it because maybe that helped you prepare, right?
shit together as a live band. Yeah,
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 yeah. You want to have time to mature and to let it kind of simmer and just getting tight as a band, and it's kind of a new situation for everybody. It's awesome to be
exactly.
able to not be completely thrust into the the crazy world, even though it is still crazy.
Yeah.
Tell me about so you've had some great collaborations over the years too. I know one of them is Dirty Diana with Michael Jackson. Tell me that story because a lot of people may not know that you're playing on that.
Yeah.
By the way, your cat is making an appearance behind you.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, it's my new, I've had him for 2 weeks.
it's
He's
a
my new kitten.
co-star.
Yeah. My little co-pilot there. Um, so, I was signed to Warner Brothers by Ted Templeman, the producer, and he was the head of A&R, and he was a producer of the Doobie Brothers and uh, and coffee is not for this guy, but he was producer Captain Beefheart and Doobie Brothers, Van Halen, Mantra, all this great
Everybody, yeah,
stuff.
everybody.
Yeah. So I was signed. This is after the success of Rebel Yell, I was signed to Warner Brothers, and um, so he was friends with Quincy Jones. And I guess, the story I got was that the follow-up album to Thriller was the Bad album, and they had another rock-oriented track. Quincy called Ted, said, "Hey, man, who should we get? We've had Eddie Van Halen," and Ted suggested that I do it, and I'm
Awesome.
forever grateful. It was a great experience. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great track too. It's down and dirty and like it's
Wasn't
really such a great feel to it.
was not what I was expecting. Yeah, and
Yeah, you're
also,
thinking it's going to be like funk, soul, or pop.
yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah, uh, and also I had never really done sessions outside of Billy Idol, and with
Ah,
Billy it was very small. Usually it's Billy, myself, and Keith, our producer in the studio. And I'm thinking I'm going to go. I flew out to LA. I was still living in New York. I flew out to do the session with, and I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be this crazy entourage, and the monkey's going to be there, and all this whacked out shit,
yeah, the
and I
giraffes.
and I opened the door, and it's just Michael, Quincy, and an engineer.
Wow.
So it was super comfortable, and they worked very I realized people making records, it's kind of all the same thing. You got a good tune, and you
Yeah.
hire good players, and they allowed me a lot of freedom and a lot of room to kind of do my own thing.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like they did the documentary that released right around the time that Michael died, and but one thing you got to see in that documentary is he knew his music inside and out. He was very
Absolutely.
very hands on, and I know Quincy was also. I mean, obviously a huge talent, but he was also a good dude. We met him a couple times out here. But so then also another great Grammy Award winning thing you did was the Top Gun theme. Tell me about how that came about.
So one of the musicians Keith Forsey worked with on the Donna Summers records was Harold Faltermeyer. So when we did Billy's third record, Whiplash Smile, Harold came in to do the keyboards. And he said one evening, he says, "Oh, Harold had gotten involved in doing film scores. He did Beverly Hills Cop. He said, I'm working on this new movie, Top Gun, fighter pilots, Tom Cruise. And I think all I knew from Tom Cruise was Risky Business.
Right. Yeah.
And he said, I'd love to have you play on the theme. And literally, on a Saturday evening after we finished the Billy Idol session, we changed over the multi-track and put up the reel for Top Gun. I think the whole session was at the most 2.5 hours. And it was kind of, I forgot about it afterwards because it was really an afterthought.
Yeah. You're like, cool, I'll play on this thing, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it was such a, Harold is such a,
It's like one of the greatest movie themes ever.
It's such a great theme, it's so good. And he really gave me a lot of room for the solo, which was kind of unheard of. And, it's like a, 32 bar guitar solo in a movie theme.
Yeah, and it's rocking. Yeah.
And then he called me from Germany and he said, the movie's going to be a big hit. And oh, okay, cool. We went to the premiere and I'm like, wow, it's a big deal. Movie explodes. And I got another call from him, 6 months later, we're going to be nominated for a Grammy. I was like, yeah, but we'll never win.
Right. Yeah.
And we ended up winning a Grammy for it, which was, it was great. It kind of validated all those, for my parents, Grammy means
it's just like the stamp of approval.
You're legitimate,
Yeah. Well, that's pretty. Yeah, it is pretty awesome. And I mean, it's funny too to win Grammy for a film soundtrack, which is probably not really on your radar, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So Billy, one of the awesome things, it's something I've always said about, playing with star acts or acts that are very well known, is that sometimes, they have money. They don't necessarily like to tour that much anymore. But Billy is not like that. It seems like you guys have always been traveling. And I know you're not on tour right now, but you have a new tour coming up and a new album. So tell me a little bit about that.
So we finished up a Canadian tour and we sort of celebrated the 40th anniversary of Rebel Yell on that tour and did a lot of stuff, that we hadn't, really played. There was a couple of tunes that back in the day, they kind of fell by the wayside live because they just, for whatever reason, we couldn't get the subtleties or,
Yeah. And you guys you have a lot of hits. So you got to play the hits first, right?
Got to play the hits. And we like to throw in like the odd, thing that we one of the more recent tours, we were doing one of the New York Dolls songs, only because I'd seen a thing about Jerry Nolan, the drummer, and I was raving to Billy about it. Oh, you got to see this Jerry Nolan thing. I was reading his book, and Billy said, "Oh, we should do that song." So we spoil ourselves. We do.
Yeah, you like to mix it up a little bit, right?
Yeah, you got to. It's great to do the things that people expect, but also we have to get our cookies off as well. And,
yeah, exactly.
Like, so we finished up our Canadian tour and then commenced or resumed working on the record, and we're now mastering it, and we'll be doing an extensive tour next year behind that. And then there's a autobiography documentary that Billy has coming out next year. So awesome. I would expect we'll be pretty busy.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, Billy's obviously, he's shown up in some really great movies and stuff too, as well as an actor. And it's that collaboration that you guys have had. I mean, it's really one of the legendary collaborations because you've been together for so long. It seems like you guys still are having a good time, which is not, as you know, it's not always the case. So when you guys are collaborating, when you're writing, like what's that usually look like? Do you kind of meet up on the road? Do you guys meet up at his house, or how does that work?
I don't think we've ever written not one song on the road, because we always said,
hectic, right? Yeah.
Well, no, because we always said we're not going to write those "I'm lonely in my hotel room" and exactly. Got my bottle of Jack Daniel, all those cliches. We said we're not going to, you have to live life to experience it. And, and now what's great is now, he's got two grandkids, and we're able to draw a lot of life experiences from that. And I'm one of those guitar players. I actually really like to know what the lyrics are,
Yeah, because
because
some guys don't care, right? But
I never understood that, because that's my blueprint. That's my roadmap.
yeah,
All right, what's the idea? What's the story? How can I take that story and put it in the grinder and figure out how it can come out as guitar,
yeah, because it's all about storytelling. Yep.
It is ultimately. And our songwriting process has never changed. It's two guys with a couple of acoustic guitars. In the case of our latest record, we work with our producer, Tommy English,
Mhm.
and we work with a couple of other writers, young guys who have a lot of energy and don't take dinner breaks, and which is good,
Yeah, because
because
if you're in the groove, you want to keep it, right?
yeah, and you need that fresh young perspective from some young guys. And also, we purposely try and avoid repeating ourselves. So how do you do it in a new way? How do you bring the energy of Rebel Yell
Right.
or
Like 40 years of
right?
vibe and right.
Because we've always said we're not gonna do Rebel Yell Part Two, and what's great is you work with new younger writers and musicians and producers, and you take how the music, your classics, affected them, and you're able to like reinvent it in a way.
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know if
So you
that
pay
makes
you
sense,
kind of
but
pay homage. You don't ignore it, but you don't let it like constrain you either, right?
yeah, and you don't try and repeat it verbatim, because that's kind of boring. I always loved bands that, a perfect example is the Beatles. Every record was different. They were
Exploring and
reinventing.
yeah.
Yep. And every song was stylistically different. And I think people will find that we grew up on the Beatles and those kind of records, and that's why you can have Eyes Without a Face living on the same album as Rebel Yell or Blue Highway. And with our new record, there's the breadth of musicality and stylistic things is pretty vast on this. And
Yeah. It's
and
nice
we're
to see
like,
too that I was gonna say it's nice to see that you still are invigorated and still have a passion
yeah,
after all these years.
we
That's really awesome to see.
yeah. I mean, I've seen musicians that I've encountered who have lost that, and
Yeah.
it's
It's
it's just
sad. Yeah.
it's a mortgage payment. And
Right.
we're very fortunate to still have a great working relationship and still really dig what we're doing. So and it goes for any job. um my brother's an industrial designer, and he has such a passion for what he does, and he teaches, and I don't care if you're a plumber or the guy coming to fix the do my lawn, my lawn guy, man. That dude is so into what he does.
And that's freaking hard
and
work too.
and he's
In
yeah,
Vegas, especially.
it is really hard work. So I
Yeah.
think if you can figure that out, that's kind of the solution. That's the
Yep.
that's the
Keeps you
way to
motivated.
get through life. I don't care what you do. If you're a barista and you're making the best freaking cup of coffee for your patrons, or
Yeah.
cooking the best meal, you've won.
Exactly. I totally 100% agree with that. Um, yeah, that's the thing. It's good to have as you get on the other side of this life thing, the kind of, I don't want to say twilight years, which we're not there yet, but as you get on over all those years of experience, it really makes you appreciate people a little bit more and appreciate
Absolutely.
appreciate your good fortunes, as we should for sure every
Yeah.
day.
Agreed.
What's
Agreed.
your some of really advice that maybe you've learned along the way that you would impart to other musicians or other people that are creators? What's some of the things that you've really learned?
Um, People skills. Uh, you know, as the musical director in Billy's band, I would say for almost 20 years now, we have some of the finest people in our band and in our entourage, and the guys who work with us on the road, and I found that that is more important than the guy who can play the most incredible Jaco Pastorius bass line
Right.
or Buddy Rich drums or anything, and also be willing to say I fucked up, you know. And that served me really well because I've never been afraid to say I don't know. If I'm in the studio, and early on in my career, I said, I would be asked, "Oh, can you play a funk thing like Nile Rodgers type thing?" I remember there's a couple of tunes on Billy's first record, and Keith, our producers, "Can you play something like Nile Rodgers?" Nile Rodgers, and I said, "If you play," I said, "I have no idea how to play that style, but if you
Right.
play
Yeah.
it for me, give me an example, I will figure it out." And I think that honesty, when I've worked with musicians who are blaming the other guy,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
"Hey, it wasn't me," I mean, and so I think people skills are really important, and have a good positive outlook. No matter what, you can always find a solution, even when things are looking. If you're a team player, you can always figure it out. And that goes for people that are your spouse or whatever who's suffering an
Yeah.
illness
Just
or whatever.
in life.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, you're there as a team player and a partner, and I think Billy always knew that I didn't have my own Steve Stevens agenda.
Right.
And ultimately, from the day I met him, it was his record deal, but I don't think we've ever, had a disagreement about songwriting credit or anything like that. I mean, I've heard horror stories about musical partners, and he
Yeah.
said,
We've all heard those.
and Billy always goes, "Well, that's punk rock, mate. Mateship." And I guess I guess it is. I guess it's be fair and bring out the best in the other people that you work with and
Yeah.
inspire them.
And you've got a winning formula, so don't fuck it up.
Yeah, that is very
Essentially, right?
true.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, that's the thing, because being on the road too, traveling, we've all kind of been there where we're tired. We don't feel maybe that into it that morning, and
Yep.
you've got to put your happy face on and make it work, right? Because that's how you get the longevity.
Yeah, or if you're in a shitty mood, you just say, "Man, stay away from me today.
Let me have my coffee."
I'm an asshole today."
Yeah, that happens. But I mean, that's
Yeah,
the thing. When you're a band, it's a family, it's a marriage.
it is.
You have your good days, your bad days, but it's the overall
It's
vision
kind
that
of,
keeps it
yeah, yeah,
together. How can
for
people
sure.
contact you and check out your schedule and all that stuff?
Well, anything to do with Billy Idol is billyidol.net. For me personally, stevestevensguitar.com. I'm pretty active on Instagram. If the questions aren't too wacky, I'll answer them, especially gear stuff
I can't
because
be on my podcast. That kind of question.
yeah. I don't, man, if I could have asked Jimmy Page a question and actually got a reply back in, 74 or something,
Right.
I think that's, it's kind of cool, to have that dialogue with players. And that's how I learn about new things. A lot of times somebody will say, "Hey, have you heard this guy? Let's go, check out this YouTube video," and I'll go see some amazing musician
Yeah,
that I
that's part of the reason
never
why
would have.
I started the podcast too. Because I started during when we had the lockdowns, all that stuff. But there's a lot of
Yeah,
players that we've all seen, like you've been almost like a household name, and we're all over MTV and all that kind of thing. But then you're also a human. You have your influences, how you got started. To me, it's
absolutely.
very interesting to learn that stuff.
Yeah.
And you always get surprises with that too. It's like, it's fun for people to kind of get maybe a different look.
Yeah, and then you start learning about the music that inspired your favorite musicians. I would have never known about Oscar Peterson if I didn't read or hear an interview with Keith Emerson or something.
Right.
Or um, one of my early guitar heroes was Steve Howe from Yes, and then he's citing all these Chet Atkins records, and I'm like,
Yeah, Roy
I would have,
Clark, all those guys were like
yeah,
they were very rock and roll actually.
yeah, I would have
Yeah,
never discovered that. So
yeah.
so it's cool. I'm hopefully turn players, young players, onto some of the stuff that influenced me. That's maybe not on their radar.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank you so much for joining me. And it's great that we're neighbors. We'll have to go grab some pizza together. Something.
Absolutely, anytime,
Yeah, it'll be fun. We'll do
anytime.
that.
Yeah.
We'll our buddy Anthony down on Horizon Ridge. We'll hook it up. But thank you so much for taking the time. Again, like you're somebody I've always admired. I've admired your playing and what your partnership with Billy has been really
I
legendary.
appreciate that. I
So
appreciate that.
awesome. Thank you so much. And everybody, please check out Steve's website and social media. His Instagram is awesome. Lots of behind the scenes stuff there as well.
Gotcha.
And have a great day, and give your cat a hug for me.
Half the time he's an angel, and then he turns into Godzilla. And
I love it. I love he's playing back there on your gear. I love it.
he's awesome, little dude. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Have a great day, Steve.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao.